Did gate kids open a portal? You're not going to believe some of the connections I've made today while researching for this topic. If you saw my last video, it was about the gateway tapes and why I was advised not to listen to them, and some research behind why I came to that conclusion. Side note, I do want to say I remain open-minded, so if any information crosses my path that would lead me to believe otherwise, of course, I'm always open to considering that information. But if you don't know what the GATE program is or what GATE kids are, we are gifted and talented kids. The program started possibly sometime in the 50s or 60s, because I've heard accounts of people who attended the program way earlier than I did, but it was active in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and I believe they still have gifted and talented programs today. It's been called many different things, TAG program, probably some other stuff too. But in general, the GATE program is for gifted kids who performed in the top 5 percentile of their class on standardized testing, or they had extraordinary abilities in creative or performing arts or developmental capacity, etc. So anyways, there's some background on that. Today I'm going to start sometime in 1947 at the Roswell, New Mexico crash. This is where my rabbit hole begins today, and you won't believe everything that is connected. Now, I did not write this down on my paper of notes today, but I did just remember that in one of my last videos, I did talk about Project Paperclip. That was on one of my bloodline videos, and I think that this could actually be related to everything I'm about to talk about today. So, sometime in 1947, there was the Roswell, New Mexico crash, which everybody knows about. They tried to hide it, but they had secret ops studying this stuff, because why wouldn't our government study alien crash site, right? Well, I'm sure few people know that a couple of years later in Kingman, Arizona, there was another crash, and they found 3 extraterrestrials. 2 were living, 1 was deceased, and they secretly took those creatures and the alien tech into I believe it was an underground base. They called it Project Aquarius. The whistleblower on that was Dan Burisch, who blew the whistle in the 2000s. So you can't find a lot of this information written down anywhere. So this is mostly based on other accounts about what this Project Aquarius was. But one of the things was the studying of these beings, but also utilizing the technology. And right after, or right around the time that we have Kingman, Arizona crash, we also have the creation of Project Looking Glass in the 1950s and 60s, which was ironically the same time that Robert Monroe was studying the hemisync technology that is involved in the gateway tapes. What I mentioned in my video yesterday, which is just purely, side note speculation, something I found odd or unsettling about the gateway tapes is that when I was tuning into the resonant tuning before you get into focus 10 or focus 12, I forget the focus dates because it's been a minute since I did them, but I felt like it sounded like a hum of a spaceship. Not like I've ever been in this spaceship to my knowledge, but that's what it reminded me of when I was listening to some of the focus exercises, okay? Which is interesting, and again, just speculation, but the Roswell crash happened before and shortly before he started, shortly before he started researching for the gateway tapes, okay? So, and that's relevant in this video for this particular rabbit hole. So what else happened during the 1950s and 60s? There was a guy named Nikolai Kozyrev, I don't know if I'm saying that right, a Russian physicist or scientist who was doing research on the Kozyrev Mirror, which is a device similar to what they were using in Project Looking Glass. It's a cylindrical vessel that somebody would enter in, and it's like a cylindrical mirror essentially, And I think they use aluminum and other metal alloys to operate this thing, but it operates through the consciousness of a person who is like, it only works because of somebody's consciousness. That's what I'm trying to say. So it enhances our psychic abilities, can help us bend time. This is what Nikolai, I wrote it down, so let me just double check. Nikolai, all right, Kozyrev. Yeah, he said that time had weight. It's influenced by intention, emotion, and entropy. And that research was published in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which is important because that's when Project Looking Glass in the United States started. That's also possibly when some of the NK Ultra stuff started. I would say a lot of it, I think, was 60s and 70s, but it's possible some of it even happened earlier than that. And then another important thing for this is that CERN, which is in Geneva, oh God, is it Switzerland? Or yeah, I think it's Switzerland. In Geneva, those experiments also started in the 1950s. So then we're gonna jump ahead to the next decade, 70s and the 80s, more MK Ultra, Project Stargate, and Cold War stuff. And I forgot to mention, by the way, that 1947 is when the Cold War started. So did the Cold War start ultimately because of the tech that showed up in this alien crash? I don't know. I wish I would have, I did a ton of research today. I wish I would have looked and seen if there were any accounts of extraterrestrials being found before 1947. So if anybody knows anything about any other extraterrestrials found at crash sites in other countries or anything, like, please let me know. Please leave it in the comment of the videos. I just started in 1947 because of all the research I did today and how it all seems to connect back to this Roswell crash, and which is ironically the start of the Cold War, which is ironically when they got the tech for this Project Looking Glass, which helped you see into other timelines, which is a similar tech that Kozyrev and the Kozyrev Mirror was studying and researching. And then we get into the 1970s and 80s. Like I just said, we have MK Ultra, mind control. But what's interesting about the mind control experiments is that all of these Project Looking Glass and the Kozyrev Mirror, they're using consciousness to power these devices. So is it interesting to anybody else that they're starting to experiment on human consciousness around this time? Are they trying to see, oh, if we alter consciousness, can it help us perceive these devices? Or maybe we can alter people from being able to use these devices. Because when you have power like that, that can see the future or past and time travel, which is what these extraterrestrials claimed to be, then you have to worry about that power getting into the wrong hands. So forgot to mention, the 3 beings that were found in the Kingman crash were, according to the whistleblower, Dan Burisch, they were from Zeta Reticuli, I believe. They were grays, and they said they were 45,000 years or 53,000 years into our future. And they were like a subset of the human race, or like an evolution of the human race, who evolved to have less emotions. And 45,000 years later, in that particular timeline that they came from, that they traveled back from, they needed to experiment on humans and take slices of our DNA to help with their DNA and the continuation of their species. They're also particularly invested in this potential timeline collapse, which I will get to here in a second, but they're interested in the timeline collapse because it has to do with the evolution and the very creation of their species. And then we go down another side rabbit hole that a lot of, supposedly in speculation, just speculating here, that the Illuminati and all these organizations, the elite that are in power, are controlled by the Greys. The Greys are calling the shots because they're trying to bring this world to collapse. And I'm sorry ahead of time if I jump around a lot, because there's literally like so many webs and how all this stuff is connected. So I might have to jump forward and then jump back a little bit to make my points known, because this also is going to tie into the Mayan calendar, but I think I'll try to get to that in a second and then connect the dots backwards. But yeah, so 70s and 80s are MK Ultra, Cold War, And then that is also the start of Project Stargate, when they were heavily researching consciousness. And that is when the Gateway tapes were released. They were trying to train spies for the Cold War, psychic spies. Meanwhile, Project Looking Glass had already been going on. And what Project Looking Glass was, I'm going to mess this up because I read so much information today, I might misremember this fact, but something about the Looking Glass device, not only was it used from Sumerian technology to create this device, but something about a quartz crystals that powered it. And I think I wrote it down. Something about, they called it like the yellow cube or the chronorizer, which used rotating rings and argon gas to warp time-space into plasma bubble, projecting future or past imagery that operators could see holograms. They used psychics at global portal coordinates, which I wrote a note to myself, ley lines, which I've made a video of a couple weeks ago or maybe a month ago. And then yesterday in my video about the Gateway tapes, there's a bunch of research in there, like hard facts from the CIA themselves, that you can go back and listen to that video, and then you'll have more background information into why this is important right here. But the Gateway tapes can channel consciousness like a laser beam. So they were having gifted children specifically who make better spies and are more moldable, because our brain is already in theta and delta brainwaves, which we need to power or to be in a specific state of consciousness and be open to stuff. Children are also closest to source, and our pineal gland is not calcified. So children are the perfect devices to operate this kind of technology. So the fact that Project Looking Glass in the 50s and 60s was used in a device that warped space and time, and that the Gateway tapes helped study consciousness outside of space and time, which is from the CIA's own website and their assessment of the Gateway tapes, and the fact that it operated because there was a psychic operating it. They needed a person to view the past and the future. And then the fact that they said they used psychics at different global portal coordinates. I didn't see a mention of ley lines, but because of what I know about the Earth's electromagnetic field and the fact that electromagnetic activity influences what they see at different sites, that is probably why they had people at certain portal coordinates, right? Because we also could have been closer to specific portal points, okay? And then, just for fun, I'm gonna oh man, sorry, there's so much, okay, because that also kind of ties back to like ancient history about Stargates, which Egyptian mythology, they said the Duat, which is the underworld, had 12 gates, which a lot of people think are the 12 Stargates. So there's potentially 12 different Stargates in our world. So that might make sense to why they had this program all over the place, and maybe they use specific sites. Maybe they use the Gateway tapes more than others because they were trying to channel consciousness. I don't know. But then what else is interesting about this? We've got from, Project Stargate. So like I said, they were training remote viewer spies for the Cold War, and remote viewing became a thing because they found out that they could remote view an item. And that was partially due to Project Looking Glass, because Project Looking Glass helps them discover I can remote view a coordinate even though I'm not there. So then we're going to get into the 80s and 90s, which is when the Montauk Project started. That was in operation at an old military base, Camp Hero, in the 80s or 90s, which is what the show Stranger Things is based off of. They were actually going to call it something that has to do with Montauk. I think they were going to call it Montauk or something until they decided on Stranger Things. That show takes place during the 80s. And this is also when the government was funding a lot of psi and portal operations, like the Black Op type things, okay? And then Montauk Project, I've discussed that in previous videos too, about the ET tech and the technology and using gifted children to operate these machines because they needed psychic, and they needed psychics, and children were especially valued as psychics because of our brainwaves, and because we are not programmed with fear, and because we don't have a calcified pineal gland. So not everybody could operate these things apparently. So certain consciousnesses, they needed them to see the future or see the past and to see different timelines. All right, so now let's see, it's gonna get a little interesting. In 1983, Kozyrev who, like I said, the Kozyrev Mirror, which was a similar technology to Project Looking Glass. He dies mysteriously. I don't know how, didn't look it up, but I know that it's sketchy because he dies, and then his research, they continued on with this research. But this is like government stuff, right? Okay. In the 90s, the Kozyrev Mirror was built, and now it's starting to be studied. And again, they're using people, they're using psychic people, they're using consciousness to operate this machinery. And a lot of people in the studies, the mirror studies, said that they had interactions with otherworldly beings, and most of them felt like they were flying and they were floating, and they saw different images in the galaxy. So they were like time traveling. All right, and then 1994, the Stargate movie comes out. So now they're introducing to collective conscious the idea of Stargates. But if you look back even, further than that, when was the first time we have heard about Stargates? If you look back into a lot of ancient texts, the earliest recollection I could find was in Sumerian and Babylonian texts, 3000 to 1800 BCE, mention Stargates, and then Egyptian mythology and the Duat and the underworld, the 12 gates, which many people think are Stargates, and then the book of Enoch in the Old Testament, Genesis 28:12. It's also said that Jacob's ladder could have been a portal or a Stargate leading them to to communicate with angelic beings, which a lot of people think that the angels and the demons are actually extraterrestrials. And then the book of Enoch, I think that was more about the Watchers, and they took Enoch up or something. The Watchers took him up, and many people think that the Watchers were like angels or something. I'm not sure, but feel free to add in the comments if you know more about it and if you think it's relevant. And then we have Sumerian tech that is said to be planted by future humans who were the Greys I mentioned earlier from 1953, that crash site in Kingman, Arizona. They were called the P-45s by Dan Burisch, the Looking Glass whistleblower. And they said that they planted that technology in our past to help us build these devices so we could see past and future timelines. All right, so then we're gonna jump up forward to the year 2000. We've got the whistleblower Dan Burisch, like I'm saying. So again, according to my research, there was not really much on this other than the whistleblower accounts, and then how you can kind of like make these lines with all the other stuff that's going on that is verified. So use your discernment on that. But then we have 2012, which is when the Mayan calendar ends and when mysteriously the looking glass stops working. So apparently before 2012, the looking glass, the future and the past would change based on who was observing it, which goes along with the double slit experiment, that your observation as a conscious observer is influencing your reality. This is where things get really effing interesting. Not only does the looking glass stop working, so they shut it down because they can no longer see any one outline. They could at one point focus it, I think, to have certain outcomes because they could see the past, and they say, okay, what happens if we bomb so-and-so? What happens if we do blah, blah, blah? This is what is going to happen. But then, again, based on the different viewers, some people were seeing different timelines, okay, based on probably like their experiences or their fear or what they knew. So we know that. So then they stopped using it in 2012, but then CERN starts doing more experiments. And CERN, the same year, also discovers the God particle, which is Higgs boson. Did I spell that right? Hold on, let me write this down. Higgs, I wrote it down. All right, well, I can't see where I wrote it down. Oh, yeah, here, Higgs boson, the God particle. And CERN is studying things like quarks, so the building blocks of reality, quarks, dark matter. And again, I said that their first experiment was in the 50s and 60s. Basically, what they're doing is it's like a giant atom smasher. They're recreating the Big Bang Theory, and it's creating tears, tiny tears in the space-time continuum. So this started in the 50s and 60s, and now at 2012, the same year that they stopped, that Project Looking Glass is no longer valid and no longer working, now CERN discovers the God particle, so dark matter, why things have mass. And I vaguely remember reading about neutrinos, which are smaller than, I think it's smaller than an atom, but I talked about it in Human Design, how neutrinos are emitted from sun and stars, and they are transmitted, they move through different bodies through different planets, and they take on the qualities. So they're information particles, and then we absorb them through our skin, and they change our DNA. So I have other videos talking about human design, which you can flip through on my channel. I'm gonna make a human design playlist here soon, so you can jump right into that if you're interested. So that, but side note, if anyone's interested about neutrinos and like the science of astrology and your energy field, like definitely this kind of stuff is just the hard science about it. And then that other stuff people might consider more pseudoscience or esoteric, but you can see how it's rooted in science. So now what I want to talk about is the Mayan calendar, because this is why all of this stuff matters. The Mayan calendar has 9 waves of consciousness and human evolution. So when it starts, it's like millions or billions of years ago, right? When organic matter like is first created. And then we've got these different ages of consciousness and evolution, blah, blah, blah. And then we've got earlier civilizations. It was like the hunter-gatherers, right? That was like low and slow evolution. And then we've got the more civilized societies where religion was a huge thing. They were learning about religion power. You've got like your kings and your serfs or whatever they're called. And then basically what's going to apply to us is like after the industrial age. Things start moving really fast after that. And in the year 1999, that's very important, because not only did a lot of people think the world was going to end then, but 1999 was the digital age, which is the age of the internet, which is what all you 80s and 90s babies are living through, because you were literally the generation who was on the cusp. You were like, how old were we when the internet came out? We were like 6th grade, right? Because I remember being on AIM, talking to my friends, AOL, Instant Messenger. So right as we were born without internet. So the 90s and 80s babies, we were the last generation to touch the ground with our hands before we grew up on cell phones like all these new generations. So digital age, and that lasted until 2011. So you can see that the 8th wave only lasted 11 years. So we went from like billion-year cycles to hundreds of thousands of year cycles in the Mayan calendar, to hundreds of years, to decades, to now we've got less than decades by the time we get to the 9th wave of consciousness, which happened on March 2011 and peaked on October 28th, 2011. And that is called unity consciousness, where they say humans are now at an evolutionary state. We are in the testing grounds of co-creation, co-creating with the universe, unity consciousness. And we are being tested. So, crazy chills. That is why the CERN machines stopped working. Could that be why they stopped working? And let's go back to the Mayan civilization, like why they might be legit, especially if you know a lot about like the Anunnaki and how they supposedly came down from, they were the sky gods, they came down, they needed gold a long time ago, so they came and seeded the human race and made them a slave race so they could mine for gold for their ships, something like that. But then the Mayan gods have very similar accounts to the Anunnaki, but they just called them different things. And it also ties back to Egyptian and like the pyramids, and how pyramids have certain technology. They align with like Orion and supposed Stargates and stuff. I'm going to stop saying supposed, because I think this stuff right here is like evidence that there are Stargates. And I'm going to get to gate kids and how we may have opened a portal in a second, but I just want to give you more background about this Mayan calendar, because this is very important. 2012 is when the looking glass device and stopped working. The looking glass device showed us different timelines, showed us different realities. And is it possible that there were certain trajectories we were on until we got to this point of co-creation, and then the machine stopped working because some kind of higher consciousness said, okay, humans, now it's your time to evolve. Are you going to collapse in fear and chaos, or are you going to rise into unity consciousness? Is this what Ascension is? I think this is what Ascension is. So now we're in this period where some people call it the timelines converging, or the testing phase, which is 2012 to 2030. And in the year 2030, there supposedly is going to be a timeline split. And certain organizations on the planet, and elite, like the Illuminati, the ones who are controlled by the Greys, from Zeta Reticuli, are really wanting us to fall into the chaotic war apocalyptic timeline, not only so they can maintain control, but and we will go back to being slaves, but so the Greys race exist, because without that timeline, they don't exist, apparently. Or we have the opportunity as humans to rise in our consciousness and choose the unity timeline. And if we choose the unity timeline, the unity consciousness, we will heal the earth. And this is, ooh, it's crazy chills. This is, so when I was making that Gateway Tapes video yesterday, when I was talking about how the Gateway Tapes channeled our conscious like a laser beam, I got this image of like all the gate kids channeling their energy into something, and I got crazy chills, like lightning bolt chills in my bodies when I said, oh my God, did our consciousness open a portal? And again, the same thing happened. I think our consciousness opened a portal, and then when I was in the car doing research on this, I got crazy chills when I was reading about that again, and I started just crying, because it's possible that we created the timeline of unity because they chose children who are, ooh, so sorry, close to source energy, close to God. We have children don't see color, they don't see race, they don't see hatred unless it is bred into them, unless they observe it and it's programmed into them. Children are naturally love and light, and they are from the heart center. They use their imagination. They're incredibly intuitive, which is why we were picked for these experiments. But were we picked for nefarious reasons? Were they trying to get us to open a portal because we had the right consciousness? But in doing so, because they chose heart-centered beings who are innocent, did we actually hold down a timeline for the love and unity timeline? Did we make the CERN machine crack through higher vibrational energy? And so if you really think about this, like the people that can't access their intuition because they're in fear, or they're agnostic, or they just don't know, and they don't have the genetic type for it, or bloodline, or whatever it is that gives us this extrasensory perception, they needed people like us to operate these machines because not everybody could do it. So there's something very special about us who have ESP, and we literally, sounds like we literally opened a portal. But now let's get to this collective awakening in the Mayan timeline, which I feel like feels so significant, because if you look back to the Mayan timeline, the timeline aligns with all the big major points in human history. So again, ever since 2012, when they said that the world ended in December 21st, 2012, right? Which is ironically, side note, when did you ever start hearing about flat Earth? I'm watching the show Under the Dome right now, and that's when they discovered like a meteor came to Earth in the 80s, and then they touched the egg, and then it created a protective dome. And the aliens in the show are like, who are coming to Earth, they have this unity consciousness. It's like the evolution of humanity. So what's interesting for me is that I've never heard of the dome concept or the flat Earth concept until very recently. And if the world really did end in 2012, were we saved by a human race? And we're being experimented on and tested right now, because this is, oh, crazy chills. This is also the first time I've ever heard about people watching us, right? I don't remember hearing about that decades ago. Of course, I wasn't quite awake then or doing this kind of research, but yeah, so I hear that, I get that a lot when I'm doing readings. It's come up in readings. It comes up in other spiritual literature too, that there's a lot of people behind the scenes watching. So is that other consciousnesses watching? Another great movie is Alien Code. And in that movie, they have an interaction with an alien being. And that movie explores the concept of time and time loops. And I don't want to spoil the movie, but there's an interaction near the end of the movie where an alien is there observing them and basically saying, like, we've been observing your kind the whole time. It's just fascinating. So are we being observed right now? And are we being observed for this timeline collapse, this timeline converging? And that's why, so basically from everything I've read today, what all this is dependent on is how humanity as a whole shifts. So why is Hollywood and all of these organizations trying so hard to implant the idea of an apocalypse? Because they want you to create that. Because when they slip it into your consciousness, you start to think that, you start to envision that. And if you're a gifted and talented person, especially, or a person with ESP, which a lot of us are, even if you weren't in the program, we are powerful beings and powerful creators. So we start to unconsciously reenact those stories that Hollywood is putting out there with us. That's why a lot of Hollywood is run by Satanists who are connected to the planet Saturn, who, if you go dig deep into the CERN experiments, there's a lot of conspiracies out there that they're connected to. They're trying to open a portal in Saturn. Saturn is the Lord of Time. Saturn, aka Satan. Time. I did a whole video on how a lot of Luciferians, I don't know, it's like how secret societies, a lot of them worship Saturn. So the fall of power, something like that. It's on my channel, so I'll mention it in my description too if you want to look more into that. But CERN supposedly is connected to that, and they have a Shiva statue. I don't know much about Shiva, but this is all stuff that's tied into the, like, why people suspect that they are trying to connect with a Saturn portal. So part of their research at CERN could be to open this negative portal so they can manipulate humanity's timelines to like the negative. And that's why a lot of us could be feeling so like manipulated a lot of the time. Like we're getting implanted thoughts, like the voice to skull technology that I talked about. I got so many ideas coming through my head, so I'm trying to keep up with them. But the other thing that's important about CERN is I wanted to share a personal experience real quick, because they say on July 7th, 2022 is when a lot of people think we shifted to a different timeline. And what is so crazy about this, I told you guys in other videos how I had some run-ins with some shady people who are supposedly part of a secret society, okay, according to gossip on the street out here. 2022 in July, July 7th was the day after my dog died. My dog means everything to me, so interesting, because it was the worst day of my life when my dog died. And 3 weeks later, I moved to Phoenix, which they say is Satan's armpit, not just because of the temperature, but because it is seeded by Freemasons, and there's Scientology building here. There's a lot of Freemason stuff going on. Like, it's the entertainment industry. A lot of people from LA came to Phoenix. And then you've got all like the Native American and the hoodoo magic and the Santeria and like all different cultures kind of blended. And then you've got Sedona and the ley lines and the vortexes out there. And so basically there's a lot of spiritual activity here in Phoenix, and supposedly we are by some big ley lines. So a lot of spiritual activity. So was I drawn here for a reason? Okay. Then literally a month after I move, I connect with the first guy who I'm very sure I'm like 99% certain was involved in one of these secret societies and forced me to go to satanic concert. And I'm like 99% sure that he was using me in a ritual, because there's too many synchronicities there, and maybe I'll go into it another time in the future, but you have to take my word for it. Had a lot of weird stuff happening, and then got involved with like a whole group of these people unknowingly. I didn't know any better. I didn't know anything about dark magic. I never had experiences with black magic or negative entities other than sleep paralysis when I was drinking. But when I started hanging out with this group and unknowingly being involved in these rituals that were disguised as comedy shows and acting shows and plays and stuff like that, in the entertainment industry, a lot of these people came from LA, and now they're here in Phoenix doing the whole your local entertainment business. Anyways, I just lost my train of thought, guys. Was that on purpose? Is something telling me not to talk about that? Okay, all of that to say, I got involved with some weird stuff. There was another person from that group. Once I cut ties with the first person, because my intuition was like, get the F away. This guy's literally crazy. Literally thought I saw him channel demons. Like if you've ever met a person, I'm not hating on mental illness, but I'm saying like, people say that people who have schizophrenia are channeling other entities. And the dark side of something like schizophrenia is like, you literally feel like they're channeling other entities. Like it sounds like a demon when they talk. And that was kind of the experience that I had. So I stopped working with them, cut ties, ended up working with their friend who supposedly hated them, but probably was secretly working with them. I don't know. Anyways, we went to Matt Rife's movie premiere in LA. This was like at the peak of my like thinking that I want to be famous phase. And the movie he was in was called The Private Eye. And when I got back, the person I was working with wanted to do a private eye thing where he wanted to use me and my remote viewing to help people find things that were lost, or like to basically be a local private detective, right? So I agreed to do it. This one girl that he had me read for, I felt the darkest energy that I've ever felt during a remote viewing reading. I saw witches and I heard the word Geneva. So basically I was trying to help this girl find a dress, and everything in me was just like telling me, it was filling my head with a bunch of like secret society stuff and like black magic and witches and just a really dark energy that I just didn't want to connect with. So basically I had to stop connecting with the energy. But one of the things that stuck out to me was Geneva. And when I brought it to her attention, I was like, does that ring a bell? I hear they make security systems. Like, could that be a security tape that had your dress? Could that, I don't know. And then I found another Instagram page by an artist that was named Geneva, and the artist's drawings ironically told a story through her Instagram grid, and the story had a lot of imagery of like wealthy families and haunted looking families and really weird because this photo shoot that I did that year was also kind of showed up on this wall that I had nothing to know about. But basically the story that those images told were like it looked like somebody was like trying to take somebody and use them for like a ritual or corrupt them in some way or something. So that was a weird experience. And I just was like, okay, I'm going to stop connecting with this energy. That's when my gut started to tell me to start separating from those people. But the weird thing about Geneva is that I had no idea that that was CERN's headquarters. And the weird thing about everything that's happened, at least to me, since 2022, 2023 especially, 2024 especially, the energy, it feels like there's been portals or something. Like I've never gone so low in my life and I've never been so high in my life. So I have a theory, like I think that whatever they're doing there is creating, you know, rips in space and time and might be affecting us. And then I want to go back to the Mayan calendar real quick, because the Mayan calendar, we're now in 18-day cycle. So that means there's 18 days of darkness and 18 days of light. 18 days of darkness, 18 days of light. That's why your journey feels like you're going really high and then you're going low. And then you're going really high and you're accelerating, and then you're going into a dark night of the soul. So I've also mentioned in other videos that gifted kids, especially those of us who are tapped into the psychic, we go really deep so we can expand that much further. So I think that's what's happening to our consciousness right now, whether this is like a synthetic consciousness, like due to technology that's in the hands of the wrong people. Like I'm not saying CERN is definitively the wrong people. I'm just saying that based on conspiracy lore, it is, and it's connected to Saturn, which is Satan and the secret societies and blah, blah, blah. And if they're, you know, trying to create other dimensions, especially to Saturn, like that's, you know, the dark lords of the world. They're trying to get them to come to Earth and create some kind of apocalypse. But I do at the same time believe we are connected to higher dimensional beings. And I think whatever happens on Earth, especially in the year 2030 or 2027, I keep hearing that in my head. So something might happen around then, because a lot of people are also connected to that year. But whatever happens in the next 5 years, this pivotal time in history, I believe it's going to depend on our collective consciousness, our collective focus. And I think Hollywood is trying like hell to get us to focus on these negative timelines, these apocalyptic events. There's fluoride in the water, there's aluminum in the sky, everything you eat is bad, you can't be a vegan, you can't be a carnivore, you can't be blah, blah, blah. Like basically everything is trying to kill you, right? Okay, so all of that, and even those of us who are into conspiracies and into exposing the truth, that can also be a trap sometimes. And it can also keep us enlightened beings who are attracted to the truth and exposing dark entities. It can keep us in a trap because we are attached to that negative timeline when we start thinking about it and feeding our consciousness to it. So I don't know what the answer is, other than if we're going to look at this conspiracy content, we have to have boundaries with our time looking at it. And we always have to leave people in a uplifted place, like in a higher place than you found them. So if we're going to dip low into the frequencies and conspiracies like we are, and we're looking at like all this negative stuff that happened and how we were targeted, what's the positive thing? Like what's the positive takeaway? All of that to say, like, we uncover truth because it brings things to light for us. And now when we can see things, when it comes to light, now we have a conscious choice to make. We have control over the outcome. We have control over our actions. And I'm going to make other videos. I talked about how I'm going to make videos about implants because there's more to the story that I learned from the Gateway Tapes video the other day. And I'm making a Dare Part 2 because there's more to that story as well. So one of the most important things you can do for your consciousness and to operate this machinery, if they're using our consciousness and they're using our psychic abilities to open portals, right? I mean, I'm curious to try group meditation, but not necessarily for the Gateway Tapes because we don't know where that is going. But like, what about group meditations about world peace? What about group meditations for harmony, for ending world hunger, for getting a clean water supply to us people or something? You know, what if we try group meditations? I know there's a lot of people out there who already do that, but I mean, that's one positive way to use it. The other thing is like to be so important about what you're putting in your vessel and how you are regulating your own consciousness. And it's important to see through these illusions so you can understand that you're being programmed, and then you can consciously decide, I don't want to be part of that program. That's how I feel about drugs and alcohol and the whole Illuminati mind control slave document, like whistleblower thing that I always talk about. Because there's like literally so many organizations and so many substances listed on that. So I don't want to be part of their agenda. I don't want them to use me for their agenda. I want to be the love and light agenda. I want to have like conscious, communities and heart-centered communities and get back to living in harmony with the earth. That's why I created my organization called Freedom for Strays. I'm really passionate about building that. I'm looking for more people to help me get that off the ground and running someday. So animal lovers and people that like to plant things, etc. People that know where to find the right land to make this happen, all of that. So not only can you, take back your sovereignty and your consciousness by avoiding substances, because that keeps you on a certain loop, and it's an easy way for people to manipulate your consciousness and direct it. Here's the thing, like when you're listening to the Gateway tapes, you're zoned out. You're on a brainwave frequency and your body feels so relaxed. That's why I think a lot of people like it, or at least why I liked it, because I was like so zen listening to it. But your consciousness is somewhere else. Like, I don't know what I was doing, except some memories, like listening to Gateway tapes, I would like consciously, I never really remember like vivid conversations or meeting my guides or anything. I usually would like semi fall asleep, but then I'd wake up and hear his voice and then get some weird downloads, or like remote viewing things would come through when I listened to them. But all of that to say, it's taking our consciousness and we're kind of like zenned out. So like, what's happening to your consciousness? The same thing's kind of happening when you're toking on the MJ or you're drinking alcohol. You lose control over your own decision making and where you're putting your own intentions. You start to be funneled through somebody else's agenda. When I was involved with all these secret society people, they pushed MJ on me. They didn't, everything we did had to revolve around that. That's not only a manipulative tactic to make them bond with you, so you can bond with people, so they can implant ideas in your head and kind of mold you to their agenda, but it's also, again, like just making you susceptible to any kind of programming. So when you're doing plant medicine, and you got to watch out in these new age spiritual circles too, because oftentimes people are going to a guru, okay, who's presenting themselves as a love and light guru, and then they're like, yes, ayahuasca every weekend, and that is dangerous too. Your consciousness is not designed to be having these crazy out of body experiences all the time. Plus you're opening yourself up to God knows what entities, and again, under somebody else's agenda, especially if you're having guides during these experiences. So I always recommend to people, meditate, but meditate to yourself. Get comfortable with yourself. Learn. When you meditate, you will learn what your higher voice sounds like, your inner guidance, your spirit guides, whatever you want to call them. You will hear and feel what that sounds like, versus your everyday moment where you're driving in the car and you get like some, probably I'm going to call it a voice to skull thought in your head that just comes out of nowhere and just kind of like sneaks up on you, and you're like, why did I start thinking about this negative thing all out of nowhere? And then all of a sudden you're having this negative anxiety attack because I don't know why, because there's voice to skull technology and there's 5G cell phone towers and we're full of heavy metals and breathing it in the air, drinking it, blah, blah, blah. But there is a way to overcome it. Just because we're thrown with it. I mean, they've done studies on people eating poison that, well, actually this was a study done with like a rabbit. A rabbit was eating poison and whatever, they're just eating the poison and they're affected by it. And then there was another rabbit that was being pet and said, I love you, and they metabolize the food differently. So when you are conscious, when you are awake, when you have good intentions for yourself, good intentions for humanity, when you're operating and vibrating on higher frequencies like love, enlightenment, joy, peace, knowledge, not fear, guilt, shame, competition, pride, anger, boredom, blah, blah, blah. Those are all lower density emotions. So you're going to attract lower density experiences. When you are vibrating in higher frequencies, your body is going to metabolize stuff differently. So then you don't have to, I don't know, this is just theory. I'm not a doctor, but from my personal experience, you don't have to worry about the other stuff so much. And part of the psyop on all this stuff is probably to put fear in your mind in the first place. So you're worried. So your energy is now being drained into the funnel of conspiracy theories. And now all of a sudden it's like, I have to stay on top of it. I have to know all the things that they're doing to us so I can expose it. But then you're just in the vibration of exposing and fighting against something. So it's all a trap. So if the more we can like stay off the internet, stay in states of meditation, we can ground in nature, we can connect with people on a heart-based level. We can listen to positive frequencies. You gotta watch out for the music you listen to as well, because of subliminals and lower frequencies, like especially heavy metal and stuff like that. Like all that, when I went to that satanic concert, like I literally felt like I saw demons like coming out of the guy's guitar. Like it was so dark and it made me like shiver. I do not like that low end energy, scary stuff. I wore crystals and my crystals were shaking, okay? So I'm like 432 hertz, 528 hertz, like healing bowls, singing bowls, tuning forks, that kind of stuff, that feels good. So yes, anyways, to answer the question at the beginning of the video, did gate kids open a portal? What do you think? Do you think that we may have stabilized one of the love and light and unity timelines? Because a lot of us are waking up right now, a lot of us are remembering it, and a lot of us want to do good. A lot of us are on that love and light timeline. A lot of us are, I got chills, a lot of us are like naturally higher vibrational, and you know what? Maybe you just need a little bit of tweaking to get back to who you are and learning how to use your abilities for yourself. I believe, especially for gate kids, if you could astral travel, if you had vivid dreams, if you had precognition, if you sensed things before they happened, if you lucid dreamed, etc., like you have the ability to develop those psychic senses in your waking life too. So that means you're probably a master manifester, but you have to get in the right emotional vicinity to manifest the more positive aspects or the more positive timelines. And then another thing that's helped me a ton is astrology and human design. Human design, I mentioned earlier, it's talking about neutrinos, which is scientifically based, which is like what they were looking at CERN and the God particles. So like neutrinos, this stuff is based in actual science. So human design is so helpful. It's looking at your auric field. Why do you think during COVID they wanted us to stand 6 feet apart? Because the human energy field is 12 feet. So 6 feet apart, that's 12 feet. Right? So that's what human design is exploring. It's looking at like, where are you taking in energy? Where are you projecting energy? And it's also looking at your senses. So are you claircognizant? Are you clairaudient? Are you clairvoyant? Are you a psychic medium? You can tell all this stuff in a human design chart. You can also tell your incarnation cross, which is very important. There is a free report that you can get for human design, but it doesn't go over the gates, which are about the astrology, and it doesn't give you the incarnation cross, at least any sites that I found. So if you want to go a step above the free report that they give you on the sites that I share in my Gate Kids Guide, I do personal one-on-one readings. So reach out to me on one of my social media sites, either Instagram or TikTok at Statements by Alex, or download my free Gate Kids Guides, and that will give you a list of what type of readings I offer, and then we can set up a reading that way as well. Astrology, again, super helpful. It helps us understand cycles, especially as we're kind of timeline hopping, because that's what astrology is. When you have retrograde planets, you're going back in time. When you have planets moving forward, they're moving forward in time, and you're always circling back around to a point in your chart that you've already been to. So when we've got the sun and the moon, we've got full moon, that's going to be a different feeling than the new moon in astrology. Different planetary alignments have different effects on our energy bodies, our mental bodies, our emotional bodies. So understanding the cycles is so important. At least it's been a game changer for me. Plus, if you're a gate kid who's already into the metaphysical stuff, you're probably going to love looking at your chart, and it's all based on the exact point in time that you were born, that your soul decided to come through this earth. So it's a neutrino stream. You came from the dark matter. You carry a specific neutrino stream of information, born into an avatar, into a meat suit, as you want to call it. And that's giving, it's an impression of your energy and how that energy is operating in this physical world. So anyways, I hope this was helpful. Let me know in the comments what you think. And I can't wait to share my upcoming videos, more about the DARE program and more about implants. This one was intense. So yeah, feel free to continue this conversation in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.